Welcome to the Directors UK podcast. We're the professional association for UK film and TV directors. No matter the format, no matter the genre, our featured directors share their approach to the craft. We hope you enjoy.
Hi everybody, lovely to see you all. I'm Andy Harrower, CEO at Directors UK. Tonight we're having conversation Lindsay Utz with Lottie Gammon on Prime Minister.
Wow, it's really great to have you here, Lindsay. Thanks for coming all this way.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's I know it's an emotional film, so I always like to check in with the audience. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming to the cinema to watch it. It's obviously a dream for a filmmaker to get people into the theater, but with this film especially, it feels somehow cathartic to watch it with a group of people. So thank you for coming out tonight.
So, thank you so much for your film. I mean, I'm sure everyone's just watched it. I watched it a few weeks ago and I found it, deeply, deeply moving and quite amazing to see that kind of candid footage of such a high-profile politician. And I don't know to everyone out here, but it feels like the Jacinda years are almost like a dream now, considering them. So it's almost a silly question, but I would love to know how you became involved in this film and why you decided to make this film.
Yes, sure. So this film is 7 years in the making. There were a lot of stewards of this film, people that carried it along the way. It began, of course, when Clark Gayford, her husband, picked up the camera and started shooting. Clark comes from a TV background. In New Zealand, he's a pretty well-known guy. When they got together, it was like big headlines, right? He had a fishing show and a home improvement show. So he had a television background. So he knew how to use a camera and he knew how to ask questions, right? And when at the time, his girlfriend had this huge promotion to prime minister, he realized, this is extraordinary and maybe I should capture some of this. So he started filming behind the scenes. And of course, I didn't know that at the time, though I was a big fan from overseas. I live in Los Angeles and I had admired her for many, many years. So when she resigned, she moved to the States and signed with CAA, which is an artists agency in the States. And they were like, oh, well, there might be a documentary. Her husband shot some material. And then that was when I got a phone call. I've been working in documentary for over 20 years. I worked first as a director and a producer, and then I worked as a feature film editor on documentaries for over a decade. So I've worn a lot of hats over the years. So I got a phone call about this project that this footage existed, and would I take a look at it? And I had just had my second baby, and I was struggling with breastfeeding. And I remember the first clip that I saw was the footage of her in New York City in the car when she's struggling to get her daughter to breastfeed. And it was incredibly visceral for me as a mother. And I had just never seen a world leader up that close with that kind of intimacy. So it took me about 10 seconds to say yes to this project. And at that time, we weren't quite sure what shape the documentary would take. But we knew that we had something really special to start with. So I always say this is a film that was made by 2 teams in 2 countries. So my co-director, Michelle Walshe in New Zealand, runs a company that did Jacinda's advertising, and they were friends with Clark and Jacinda, and they knew Clark was kind of shooting things behind the scenes. They didn't know exactly what he was shooting, but they did support him through those years. And in any of the scenes where you see Clark, like there are key moments like in New York City or when she goes back to work where my co-director sent a camera in. So they captured a few key moments as well. But when I came on was sort of the last 2 years of that 7-year journey. And she had moved to the United States at that point, and I was so lucky to have her there because I had a million questions for her. And, that was after she resigned. And so we started shooting with her for a year in Boston then. And the film just kind of grew from there.
It's amazing. I'm just going to jump in because I feel there's so many things I want to ask you about this.
I know. This is like, it's like a crazy story.
So I guess firstly, just on that kind of co-directing, how did that relationship start? You mentioned that there was someone already involved. That must have been a process to build trust with that other director.
Yeah.
How had you done that kind of thing?
I hadn't. I hadn't done that before. And it was challenging, but it was also really beautiful because, a lot of the work that we do, a lot of it comes down to taste. And Michelle and I had similar tastes, came from similar backgrounds, and we had very much a shared vision for what this could become. So there were a lot of meetings. I had to meet all the New Zealand team. I met Clark. I met Jacinda. It's a long process before you're actually signed to the film. And yeah, there's a diplomacy aspect to that because the trust is important, and having that trust in place is critical in order to continue the intimacy that they started in New Zealand. So so that was and so Michelle and I spent time in Boston together interviewing Jacinda and capturing her in the States. And then I built a team in the United States, a DP, the edit team. Our composer, Sophie, lives in London. So it was a very international project, international team, mostly made up of women, I would like to say, aside from Clark, who very graciously handed over his footage. Because I think he understood how important it was for women to tell this story. I really think it's powerful when women make films about other women because, that selection process, the things you tend to focus on are the things that you relate to as a woman. So I think in that sense, I think it is really important that there were a lot of women behind this film.
Great. I guess I want to move on then to, you've built a relationship with your co-director, then obviously the big relationship to build is with Jacinda and Clark, which you mentioned a little bit there.
Yeah.
And you went on to film in America with her in those scenes. So just tell us in a bit more depth, how did you go about building a relationship and the trust that's needed, that clearly a very intimate film? Like what was sort of the real process there?
Yeah, I mean, my first meeting with her, she had a layover in LA for about 6 hours. So we met in Culver City, and it was my husband and myself and Clark and Jacinda and my youngest child and her daughter at the time, who was maybe 4 at that time. So it was just very casual. We had lunch. It's about just getting to know people to see if there's a connection. There needs to be an alchemy, that feeling of, can I trust this so that was a process. But we all really liked each other. There was a real connection between all of us, and we shared a similar vision for what this could be. And, I credit Jacinda a lot for being such an open participant, such a willing subject, because, I mean, this, subjects are not always easy, and sometimes they're reluctant, and it's hard work to get them to open up. But she, like we say in the film, she's a real lover of history. And so I think she understood on a deep level that there was significance to sharing these most vulnerable moments, that maybe, it could be useful for people to see what it's like behind the scenes. And I really credit her with being able to be vulnerable and to give us the trust that she needed to give us. I mean, she didn't see a cut of the film until after we submitted it to Sundance, which was really important to us because we didn't want to be, we're not doing this to make a promotional piece for her. This is about creating an honest story. And that story has highs and lows, and some of it is flattering and some of it is not flattering. And she was really willing to let us go there. Yeah.
I mean, that is extraordinary to me that she just gave you a carte blanche with all that material. So there was no like, oh, not that role, not that tape.
Nope.
That's really amazing because in my experience, sometimes you get that magic treasure trove, but there's usually bits that are extra sensitive that require extra viewings and thoughtful process going into it. So
there were some things that were redacted because of COVID related issues, but nothing significant that would have challenged the integrity of the film.
Well, that's really credit to you that she had that trust in you and your team that just kind of go for it. I mean, that's the dream.
She was a dream subject. She really was. And she is like in person the way she is in the film. She really is like, if you meet her, she's warm, she's charming, she's funny. It's all the things. Yeah. So she was a joy to work with. Truly.
So you start the project, you've got a great relationship with Jacinda, and did you already know at that stage that you have, because you've got various pieces of really critical archive here.
Yeah.
Could you just talk me through when you started the project, what were you sort of starting with?
Yes. So we were starting with Clark's footage, and then we discovered that there were 40 hours of this oral history project that she had participated in, which they had been doing for several years. They were interviewing local politicians, not just the prime minister, but members of parliament. It was just part of an ongoing history project. Normally, those archives, you can't access them, and they're not supposed to be released until the politician has died. But there's one exception. If the politician asks for them, they can be released. So when we found out that she had recorded over 40 hours of raw audio diaries, of course, as a documentarian, my head exploded. And I was like, we need those. Can you ask for them? And she did. And we got them. And they were extraordinary. I mean, because you can't recreate that in an interview, that emotion that's in her voice, like after the Christchurch shootings, you can hear it. It's like, it's a week now since the shootings. How are you feeling? And you can just feel her emotions. So, I come from a verite filmmaking background. So for me, those were little verite gems that were, impossible to replicate. So we knew she was writing a book in Boston, which has come out this year. And so she was in a very reflective place, which was great for us and for interviewing her because she was really, kind of absorbing what she had just been through and decompressing from the 5 years she had spent in office. And we realized that those audio diaries needed a visual. They needed to, so, you see the waveforms, and we kind of use it as a device, obviously, to go back and forth in time. But we asked her not to listen to any of them until we got there with our camera, because we really wanted to shoot her when she was hearing them for the first time, because we, suspected that it was going to be emotional for her to relive those moments. And so when we went on that shoot, we had identified, at that point, we had 15 key audio diaries that we knew were kind of tentpole moments that would be tentpole moments of the film. And we, cut them and prepped them for her and, queued them up and then shot her listening to them, because we knew that was a way in which we could go back and forth in time and weave them kind of seamlessly into the film.
Thank you. Yeah, I know when you sort of get a lot of audio material, it can be quite challenging. It's sort of exciting, but it's also challenging, isn't it?
Yeah.
So would you tell us, I mean, you have touched on that there, about how you started weaving that in visually, but you used it as more than just showcasing that archive, didn't you? It sort of became more than that in the overarching film. It sort of became the glue, the interview that that is not an interview, that's interspersed. Would you just sort of go into more detail with the audience about how you sort of crafted that?
Yeah, well, our first cut of the film was 17 hours long. It was, and I always, that's how I like to work. I'm very excited to be here tonight because I am a nerdy process junkie. I love to talk about like the making of these things, and I find that when you're working with something like this, where you have source material from so many different places, that you kind of just have to slam it all together and see how it talks to each other. And so we had Clark's footage and we had the audio diaries and we had the interviews that we, started shooting in Boston. And then we had an archive team in New Zealand who was going through talkback, hundreds of hours of talkback radio, which is also layered into the film because we wanted the voice of New Zealand. We wanted to give you the full scope of what the public was feeling. So you hear both sides, right and left, of, politically what was happening on the ground. So talkback radio is woven throughout. And, we just I always tend to start chronologically because it's like, don't mess with God. There's something beautiful about chronology. So I tend to like to start there before, I mess with structure and play with time, because sometimes you don't have to do that, because the beautiful progression of natural time can be a gift. And so we kind of slammed it together in a chronological way and wove things in. But then, you look at the 17 hours and you can start to see what's shining, what's not working, what needs to go, what's too inside politics, what's too, so that was kind of how we did it. And then, for me, I like that distillation process. I, prefer that. I have friends, colleagues that work on films and like to, their first cut is like 2 hours. They just want to get to a 2-hour cut and then they work from that. But I can't work that way because I need to sit with the material. I need to be with it. I need to feel it. I need to understand what's there. And then oftentimes you'll have like 4 versions of something that are all doing the same narrative work, but you got to choose one, and it just sometimes takes time to let go of things. And so that 17 hours eventually came down to 11 hours, and then that eventually came down to 7 hours, and that eventually came down to 5 hours. And then you can start to see it more, and you can see your holes. And we continued to shoot with her because we realized we were still missing key things.
I'm really interested to understand that also as perspective of you. You've got a very illustrious career as an editor of feature documentaries, and this is, your sort of big feature doc as a director. When I'm editing, you tend to sort of have your editors almost like the bad guy making you cut things out. How did you manage to do that as a sort of with the editor and the directing heads? How did you sort of go about that process?
Well, yeah, I had so much experience as an editor, and I took on projects that had a lot of footage. Like I edited American Factory. We had 2,000 hours of footage on that project. Similar process of just kind of distillation, and giving the edit time to kind of simmer like a good sauce on the stove. The longer you let it cook, the better it is.
Were your editors harsh on you? I guess that's my question.
I got to hire 2 of my best friends who actually happened to be, I think, 2 of the best doc editors working in the States. So that was a joy. And one of whom I've been working with for over 15 years. So I had a real shorthand with them. And since I had experienced all sorts of different. I had worked with lots of different directors, some good experiences, some bad experiences. When you're in the director's seat, I think you try to be the director that you would want as an editor. So I was involved enough that they didn't feel like abandoned. Like I didn't just throw the footage at them and disappear, but involved enough to like give them the direction, but also I gave them a lot of room to work as well, because I know as an editor how important that is for them to have time to sit with the footage and feel it. And, and this is such a collaborative art form, and everybody's drawn to different bits and pieces, and something that my editors would choose, maybe I wouldn't see right away. And so I think it's very important that there's that time, to explore. And you'd have to ask my editors, but I'd hope they'd say it was a positive experience. It was really helpful to be shooting and coming back with the footage, because I always knew when we got the moment, I was like, oh, we got it. And you know what you need, and you know the connective tissue, and you're already architecting the film in your head. So you're kind of very focused when you go out in the field and know what you need.
I'm interested in that. Did you, because sometimes when you're out shooting, you sort of have your shopping list and things you need, but also you need to let things happen. Yes. So do you have to sort of balance that internal conflict?
Yes. And then interviewing her, you need to stay so present with the subjects when you're interviewing them. And she was very raw, especially as you saw during the Christchurch section. So those interviews, we knew we needed a master interview, but we didn't want to do a master interview, like something that felt separate, like a detour from the emotional journey we were taking you on in New Zealand. And Clark's footage is so intimate and so close that we knew that any master interview we shot needed to carry that same kind of tone and that same kind of intimacy. And so we shot with 2 cameras, and the second camera was always handheld. That was very important to me. So those interviews with her, we're usually on the tight shot. We're only on the medium shot like a couple times in the film, like in the moment when she slams the laptop. And but I wanted to stay very tight, very handheld, in order to carry that same language from the past into the present. So it didn't feel like a master interview, because we didn't want to take you out. We wanted to bring you into her perspective and into her memory and into her recollection of what happened, but we didn't stylistically want to feel like we were taking you out of the film in any way. So we really tried to create a kind of seamless experience between the past and the present.
So just while we were talking about that shoot in Boston, so did you go back for any pickups or anything, or was it all shots? So those interview, sort of non-interview interviews that are interspersed with the audio interviews,
yes,
were they were shot at different times, or were they all? Because I thought in my head, thinking about how you make films, you think you need to go back and get
we had to go back,
but it works
a few times
very well. Just it's interesting. Like, do you want to talk about how you sort of managed that, because that can be a difficult feat?
Yeah, I mean, as we were putting the movie together, you start to see your holes, and then you just have to go back out in the field and keep getting material. And then we also shot with her in California, because she's been doing a lot of she's done a lot of speaking after her tenure as prime minister. So. And then we shot her wedding in New Zealand. I mean, there were a number of things which we knew was going to be a thread, because they weren't married at the time, which was incredibly scandalous, that the prime minister was having a baby and she wasn't married. So, of course, when they did decide to get married, we knew we needed to get that as well. So there were, we kind of understood the beats of the film, and we had to continue to pursue the ones that we were missing. And I do want to talk a bit about the news footage, because one of the things that I said to my archive teams, both in New Zealand and in the United States, is I don't just want the press conference, the sound bites. I want the moment when she walks off the stage and the moment when she walks on the stage. And anything like the more raw, the better, because that way we could treat the news footage as verite as well. And one of my favorite, and I think one of the most powerful moments, is after Christchurch, and she gives that speech. And then you just watch her walk off the stage. And that walk, to me, off the stage is just, there's a silence, there's a stillness, and there's just such an emotional power in that. So I really have to credit my archive team, because it's not easy to find that. Usually when you're licensing material, it's like you're just licensing like the sound bite, but they really dug around because I was like, but I want the moment when she walks off the stage. So that was key, was finding that kind of material as well.
I'd like to talk a bit more about Clark's footage because it's so pivotal to the film. And obviously, you said that he very kindly just sort of handed it over to you. What a gift! But I mean, how, you said there was a 17-hour cut. I mean, there was heaps of it. What sort of lens did you put on in your mind when you were looking through all that material? I mean, how many hours were there? How did you obviously said there was, very visceral stuff as a mother, and you connected with, but you're also, Jacinda's much more than a mother. She's, so how did you sort of, when you were doing that first sift, go through it in the kind of way that you felt was right for the philosophy of the film, if you like?
Yes. So he shot about 400 hours of footage. A lot of it was COVID. And we had a cut at one point that COVID was like very long. And, you do these rough cut screenings and people are like, I just can't live through COVID. It's just, we just had to keep pulling back on COVID because it's like nobody wants to go through that again. So there was a lot of COVID stuff, but what we gravitated towards were those family moments, the moments that felt universal, that felt like you could see your own child in that moment or your own husband. And for us, this was a film that had to transcend politics. It had to transcend New Zealand politics and politics in general, because we wanted this film to reach a global audience. And there's so many universal themes in this film: motherhood and, the juggle of work and life, and, so many things that people could connect to on a human level. And that was always our North Star. And I've been asked along the way, like, well, why didn't you investigate more of her policies? Why didn't you get more into her political decision? And that was because we didn't want to, because that was not the film we were making. And frankly, we thought the audience wouldn't want to sit through that. And regardless of your politics, we wanted the audience to experience her as a human being and to see this family, this beautiful family unit. And, I have a husband who works in academia, and his schedule is much more flexible than mine. So, the childcare tends to fall on my husband in a big way. We have 2 kids. And so I have a very similar kind of relationship with my own husband that you see here. And a lot of women do, especially women who have big careers, who are ambitious. And we wanted to normalize what that looks like when the father becomes the primary caregiver. And it was very important to us to show that. And, because women are, like, you're supposed to do it all, and you can do it all, but you need a lot of support, and I think we need to normalize that you need a lot of support. And I think there's something very moving about seeing him take up the childcare and the laundry. And we make fun of him at one point with the laundry, because he was filming himself doing the laundry, and then she gives him a hard time about it. But we also thought that was a funny way to, like, just call attention to the filming itself. But that was all, like, very important to us, that people remember this film as more than just a film about politics.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly the choice, isn't it? I just wondered, it would have actually been quite hard for her to have filmed some of those more gnarly conversations that were going on within the political sphere. I'm guessing that's also why that material wasn't probably there in that stuff.
No, there was a lot of, like, back and forth about the inside baseball of what was happening in that moment and but for an audience, and I mean, I think this is why when the New Zealand team brought the film to America, they brought it to America to finance the film, because financing it in New Zealand would have been complicated and politically fraught. Because they use taxpayer money to finance a lot of documentary films in New Zealand, so that wouldn't have been a good look, which is why the film came to America. And the producer who brought me on board really wanted this to have a global perspective. So that was really key for us to make sure that this could resonate with audiences everywhere.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when you think about, the conflict and the challenges that your character faces in a story, like earlier on, she's kind of, in her career, she's having all these amazing successes, but she's almost like in conflict with herself, isn't she? But then she comes, your final act, which is amazing with, the protesters, that's really where you feel the outside is, suddenly she's not untouchable. And that's really, really powerful. Had you always had that idea to have that as a third act? Because there's quite a substantial chunk of footage from that particular, you've really zoomed in on that moment.
Yeah.
Would you be able to talk me through a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, when I saw that for the first time as an American, seeing the Trump flags outside the parliament there, I was I'm gonna like cry thinking about it. It reminds you how small the world is, and how it's devastating how our politics were exported there. I mean, the QAnon thing was really hot and heavy in that moment. There were Russian disinformation campaigns that were being pumped into these liberal democracies, and she was such a progressive, popular politician that I think she was really targeted in that sense, and they were quite effective. The disinformation was quite effective, and it's heartbreaking to kind of see it unfold. Yeah, because her policies, while they were strict, there were, when she shut down the country, there were New Zealanders who couldn't get back in, New Zealanders who were living abroad, who were suddenly separated from their families for a long time. But they've done studies and they've done estimates after her prime ministership that she saved up to 60,000 people's lives. In that decision to shut down the country in that really strict way. And she says it in the film. If she had to do it again, she would still decide to do more than not enough. And it's a powerful idea, right? To put people and lives before everything else. And it's just so rare because we're seeing a world that's guided by politics of division and fear. And it's just very inspiring to see somebody driven by compassion and humanity and the desire to save people's lives.
No,
I don't know if I answered your question.
I mean, I think so. I mean, obviously that you clearly, I mean, from how you're talking about it, that clearly that footage was so resonant, especially for an international audience, for an American audience, and it seems to that is the place where, not the wheels start coming off the bus, is a bit crass, but it's where things start to go wrong for her as a leader. And it's really important, she can't just be Saint Jacinda all the way through. We need to understand how things did unravel near the end. And that must have been quite a delicate, difficult process.
Right. Well, I mean, it's also like you're in the third act, so it's dramatic and it is a breaking point, and it is, from a narrative perspective, it's a good third act scene. But I also think it says something about the way the world works and how our politics work, and how small and interconnected we all are. So I think it worked on a number of levels.
Yeah, no, it really did. I wanted to talk a little bit more about sort of craft, and we've talked a lot about the footage, but what about for the sound side of film? How did you start planning that? Obviously you had all this lovely audio. Did you have a sort of a plan to begin with, like with the music, with the soundscape? Like, what was your sort of plan?
Yeah. I never get these questions. So I'm so happy to talk about this. We've been traveling with the film, and Jacinda's often there. So everyone wants to hear from Jacinda. So it's a delight to get to sit with other directors and talk about the craft. Yeah. We, music wise, we worked with a brilliant composer. She does primarily narrative work, which I really wanted for this movie. She's London based, Sofia della Alessandre. And I'm not the kind of, because I come from an editing background, I never lock picture and then score the film. I really like to work with the composer before we are locking picture. So she gave us a lot of stems and suites, and we came up with themes, core themes, and then she would give us a suite that then the editors could play with the stems and work with. So we were really all like halfway through the process already working with our composer's music, because it's like, you can fall in love with other temp music and then it's like really hard to take it out. And I hate that. But I always really try to not put music in too soon, because you got to craft the emotion of the scene first and then find where the music can amplify that. And I never want to crutch too much on music. And in this case, when we go big with the music, we go big, because I do like to go big. I think in moments it calls for that. But Sophie I just think she did such a beautiful job. And then in terms of the needle drops, we knew we wanted to use a lot of Kiwi music, and the film has, it's all Kiwi music except for the Holly song that plays during the wedding scene, but that's the Commonwealth, so I would just to say it's still, yeah. So and the music for us, like having big needle drop, recognizable songs, like at the end of the film, Don't Dream It's Over, which is one of the most famous New Zealand songs. That kind of helps create an accessibility in a film, and I dare to use the word commercial, but it helps, it helps bring an audience in, and it helps keep the film moving along. So music was important in that sense, because we wanted the film to feel entertaining, and we wanted to use songs that we knew people loved, and so we didn't shy away from that.
Yeah, no, I think that's I mean, it gives the characters, isn't it? You're trying, and it's a bit like you were talking about how you were using radio as well, of people from New Zealand, that New Zealand layer that you were trying to get into the film.
Yes, the New Zealand, the talkback radio is in there, and then the audio diaries. They were. So how it worked is a woman would call Jacinda every 2 weeks, and they would just do a catch up. Like, how was your week? What do you think about this? And the woman who's interviewing had a microphone, so she sounds great. But Jacinda's end of the phone call is not, the audio quality is not fantastic. And we did everything we could to try to sweeten it in the mix. But in the end, I made peace with the fact that it has that phone quality, like it's not as sharp as the rest of the audio, but I kind of love that, because you can feel it lends to the authenticity of the moment, and at that point in the film you kind of understand, I hope, that what you're hearing is like of the moment. Yeah,
for sure. No, that definitely feels authentic.
We tried like every AI tool and under the sun to try to make it even clearer, but sometimes AI just makes it worse.
So, I wanted to know, and this might just be a question for Jacinda, I don't know if you can answer for her, but do you know, so often we put our contributors through quite a lot making these films, especially when, she's going over these sort of 5 remarkable years. And I think she says in the film, like, I can't even, I wouldn't remember these things if I wasn't listening back to it. How did she sort of deal with that process? Like, do you think she was, after doing those really intense interviews, do you think it was good for her, or did she take time afterwards? Was it difficult?
I think the Christchurch section was really hard. When we were interviewing her, that was difficult. I think for her to go back into that place and remember that. And when she talks about it today, she gets very emotional still. I think it was one of the hardest days, weeks of her life to be that close to that kind of violence and trauma. So that was difficult, but she really trusted us and trusted the process. And we tried things that didn't work, and she was fine with that. And we tried things that did work, and she was very patient with us. And I was really genuinely moved by that, because she could have been like, hey, you've been here for 10 hours, can you leave now? But she really let us stay, because sometimes it takes, as you interview people, sometimes it's like it takes a while to get to that emotional place. But she was really lovely.
Well, I mean, yeah, she sounds like a dream. I think we're having a little wave over here that maybe it's time for questions for the audience. So please put your hand up if anyone's got a question for Lindsay. Yes, got a lady in the red jumper.
Thank you so much. That's such a moving film. And I have a question. I don't know if it's appropriate question because I'm curious about her a little bit, and I don't know if you can answer for her. But like the first half of the movie, you can see how enthusiastic she was, and I really was sitting there hearing, like I was having a hope. Oh my God, it's possible for a woman, and for like I have the hope for politics. But then seeing how actually this broke her, and that she even left the country. So I just curious how she's feeling now. Did she felt that she couldn't stay in New Zealand anymore, that she needed to change the country? Because I'm very curious about this change of country, not just resigning, but changing the country. That would be very interesting.
I mean, it's very surprising to watch a politician have power and then give it up. It's also surprising to watch somebody have power and not abuse it. So, there's a lot that's extraordinary about her story, but I think her resignation was very complicated. It was a mix of the polls were going down. She really was pretty drained after 5 years. I mean, you can imagine, and you can see it, you can feel it. So on a human level, I actually admired her choice to step aside, because she realized it's time for somebody else to take over. And but it didn't destroy her. I mean, she's very busy. She has multiple organizations that she's involved with, and she's doing such incredible work now. So even though she's not in politics anymore, she's still just as maybe more so out in the world, effective, enacting change. After the Christchurch massacre, she started an organization called Christchurch Call, which still goes on to this day, and it's an extraordinary organization. So that attack was live streamed on Facebook for 5 minutes before it was taken down. So you can imagine for family members and just how devastating that is. So she brought together tech companies from all over the world to develop an algorithm that would identify violent content online and immediately take it down. So that was her doing. She brought together, and she still works for that organization to support that. So that she's doing that. She's working on climate initiatives with Prince William, his Earthshot Prize organization. She has her own organization called Field, which is mentoring young leaders in empathetic leadership. So she's doing that. So she's very, very active in the world. And then, of course, she travels, she speaks. Everybody wants her to run the UN. Everyone wants her to get back into politics, but I think the blood sport of politics was not, in the end, something she wanted to continue. And I don't blame her, but I do think, so we had to be honest about the fact that this was difficult, and but we didn't want to deter people from going into politics, which is why I think it's important to, reiterate that she was a reluctant prime minister. She wasn't seeking power to begin with, but once she got it, she turned out to be so extraordinary at it, and I think her leadership leaves a legacy. And as a documentary filmmaker, for me, it was important that there was a historical record of this leadership and this time in office. I have 2 young daughters, and I would like them to have a portrait of what it looks like when somebody leads with kindness and empathy and compassion, because we're just not seeing enough of that. And I think we should expect that from our leaders. And I think that we should continue to vote for people who advocate for that and lead in that way. So I hope the film leaves people with a sense of optimism and hope that there is another way forward.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions?
Hi, thank you so much. That was phenomenal and insightful and very funny as well.
It's very funny.
Yeah, I was really moved by it. I wanted to ask so many questions, but you said blood sport, which really stood out to me. I was really intrigued by the fact that when she was in rooms with her, I guess, cabinet, her team, she was able to kind of freely express herself, but also express herself emotionally. And of course, she did that with you, and she shared that with all of us watching it as well. I never expected that. I guess in your mind, you think blood sport, you think stoicism, you think it's not safe to do that because you're seen as, quote unquote, weak. Which what is that? Because we're human. But I wondered about your experience with that, if that surprised you, and if there are other things that you learned in the proverbial corridors of power that I guess taught you about like leadership at that level.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we tend to think that kindness is naivety or kindness is weakness. But you can be kind and firm. You can be kind and strong. You can be empathetic and have, and be effective. I mean, a lot is said about the fact that she had a child in office but look at what she accomplished. She was focused. She was determined. Her leadership style, while all of these things that we think of as I guess traditionally female qualities, kindness and compassion, that's somehow weakness. But in fact, she was incredibly strong and effective. And so I think she proves that you can do both things. And I think that's actually the power of her leadership, is that she proved that you can get things done and not, be a jerk along the way or be cruel or, engage with, the kind of politics that we're seeing today. And I think that's important to see that, because there's some kind of idea that in order to get things done, you have to be brash and rude and awful. I don't find that effective at all. And I think she proved otherwise.
Thank you. No, isn't it? We're done. Okay. Oh, well, thank you so much. Thanks.
We're going to be outside if you want to chat some more. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming here today.
Thank you.
Big thank you to Lindsay.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
This podcast was recorded at a Directors UK member event. You can hear plenty more directors in conversation by subscribing on the usual streaming platforms. Follow us on social media and find out more about us at directors.uk.com.